Hello, fifth grade. Welcome to another fun, exciting social studies lesson. Today what we're going to do is something really not even related to what we were talking about. Kind of focuses more on when we talked about Black History Month, and looking at, when we were saying the social movements and looking at, when we talk about Black Lives Matters, the current social movement. Um, and there's a lot of underlying themes in this, and that go back to what we were taught earlier this month in our chapter, which is on um, treatment and a hundreds of years. I'm not talking about almost 4 centuries, 300 years, a little almost 400, about 400 years of um, what is considered racism towards a group of people um, in the United States. So I have found actually wasn't really found. I actually stumbled upon this last summer, right when kind of like the Black Lives Matter movement was really starting to put protest in Washington and having their marches, and there was a lot more push for this idea of institutional reform into a lot of areas of social life. And I found this video that really explained it in a way that I felt helped. And I'm like, oh, I could share this with my students, and they're going to understand what this means. They're going to understand like the reason behind a march, the reason behind a protest, the reason behind people becoming upset when someone is hurt unjustly by a police officer, or is an area, for example, even current now, an area is not able to get vaccines from a virus, right? There are institutional and things in place that are beyond the control of a person, but are an institution. We put pressure on our political leaders to make change. And that was seen throughout the civil rights movement, putting pressure, nonviolent pressure, on institutions, boycotts, protests, and change was made. So I found this video that explains it nicely, and then I have an activity for us to do about a book that came out a couple of years ago. It's called Undefeated, and it really talks about, despite everything coming, despite these systematic limitations have been put on African American and Black people, there's many hundreds of thousands, so many people who have risen up beyond that. And so we'll talk about that after. But I wanted to first share this video with you, and then talk about the story, have the story read. I found a video of the author reading the story. And then you're going to do a project in a small group of students, at least my classes, how your other teachers decide to assign this. You're going to do a small little project looking at some of the people focused in this book, and how they were undefeated, and how they've become undefeated against the limitations that have been placed upon them, or that they had to live into or live through. All right, so enough of me.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin, who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire Black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny Black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start, so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
Peace. All right. So, as I said, I really like the way that video clearly explained things of why, for example, there's so much against, there one thing it said towards the end of the video was, the implicit bias and how we can fix it is, and the loaning, the way predatory lending and money is getting. This is kind of like people who I think it's called like advanced paycheck lending, or there's rules that kind of like people need money before their paycheck, and then these loans make it harder for them to pay it back, make it more difficult for them to, their credit bad. Protecting voting rights, we saw this extremely this recent election, where parts of the United States were changing the rules, making it harder for certain areas that were in vote predominantly Democratic, to make it harder for them to vote, or not allowing absentee mail-in ballots, right? That whole debate during the election, or making it like, oh, you had to have an ID. Well, if someone's a resident, or make those difficult, and maybe pulling places in different places that were harder for people who live in rural areas to get to. And the reform of the criminal justice system is the idea of, maybe for a lot of causes, when we call 911, police always come, but there are other ways and different places in the United States that are starting to have other systems. Like, is it an emergency where someone is hurting you, or is this an emergency where, so you need to have like a social worker or a mental health person come and help out a person to defuse a situation, and that isn't necessarily violent. And also looking at, the way people are incarcerated and the jail system. A lot of this is really starting to be put onto our groups. Here in California, we have this type of education system where certain places, certain districts, and certain cities in certain towns do deserve to get more money than other schools in other places that are more wealthy because of the need that they have. And that's called local control funding. And so a lot of states are starting to do that, but it doesn't always work out. California sometimes is different in how they try to be more progressive and make change and fix things that are wrong. So aside from that end, that just gives you a little background. I think it clearly explains kind of like the reason for a lot of social movements is this idea of things aren't just, things aren't right. Now, and speaking of things are not just and things are not right, put this video back up. The story, some of you may have read this, it's called Undefeated. It's by Kwame Alexander. And I was about to say, my daughter's saying no, it's not true. And if you have not read a book by Kwame Alexander, he's an amazing writer, an amazing poetic writer. And my friends who like basketball, he has this book. It's called Crossover. It is written entirely in poetic verse. And it's so exciting. My students who love to play basketball and like, oh, I don't want to read a book. I give them this book and they are like enthralled. So I highly suggest you go to the library and check this out. He also has one on soccer. It's called Booked. And same idea. He has a couple other ones. I don't have those necessarily in my personal classroom library, but Undefeated came out in 2019. Last year, it won, check my notes, the Caldecott Award, which is the award that goes to like the best illustrated books for the year, and a Newbery Honor, so another honor book. And the illustrator received the Coretta Scott King Award. So Martin Luther King's wife has an award for children's literature that portrays positive images of Black and African American people in children's literature and in novels. And that was also on this book, if I'm not mistaken. So the Coretta Scott King Award is the black triangle here. So anyways, it's a highly decorated book. I bought mine right when it came out, so it didn't have the medals on it. Trendsetter teacher that I am. So needless to say, I found a video of the illustration of him reading the poem. It's actually a poem that's illustrated. And what we're going to do is I took the entire book and made it into a slideshow for you to find out more information of the people, the stories behind Undefeated. I think I like that Kwame Alexander, what he did is he took this idea of, despite what has happened in history for hundreds of years, the Black people have been continually undefeated, right? They have continued to fight forward. And there's really some great people that are illustrated in the story. So I'm going to share that now. And this is him reading the book. I think it's somewhere in England because it looks like a lot of English people, and the person who's speaking is an English person. But you can make your own judgments on that one.
By reading from it?
I get to read it?
You do? Would you like him to read it?
Y'all want to hear it?
Yeah.
Read it to me.
All right. I'm going to stand up for
That's
this.
great.
This is the Undefeated. We have it up here. Yes. Hello out there. Glad you all could join us. If you have the book, you can follow along in your text, or you can see it on the screen. This is for the unforgettable, the swift and sweet ones who hurdled history and opened a world of possible. The ones who survived America by any means necessary, and the ones who didn't. This is for the undeniable, the ones who scored with chains on one hand and faith in the other. This is for the unflappable, the sophisticated ones who box adversity and tackle vision, who shine their light for the world to see and don't stop till the break of dawn. This is for the unafraid, the audacious ones who carried the red, white, and weary blues on the battlefield to save an imperfect union. The righteous marching ones who sang, "We shall not be moved because Black lives matter." This is for the unspeakable. This is for the unspeakable. This is for the unspeakable. This is for the unlimited, unstoppable ones, the dreamers and the doers who swim across the big sea of our imagination and show us the majestic shores of the promised land. The Wilma Rudolphs, the Muhammad Alis, the Althea Gibsons, the Jesse Owenses, the Jordans and the LeBrons, the Serenas and the Cheryls, the Reese Whitleys and the undiscovered. This is for the unbelievable, the we real cool ones. This is for the unbending, the black as the night is beautiful ones. This is for the underdogs and the uncertain, the unspoken but no longer untitled. This is for the undefeated. This is for the undefeated. This is for you and you and you, Jamie, and you, Imogen. This is for you. This is for us.
All right. You can see how powerful that poem is. It is a really wonderful poem, beautifully illustrated. So what you have assigned is the assignment is you will have your version of your slides for your group. There are 3 persons in the group. There may be one group of 4. And what you are going to do is each person is assigned certain slides. And what I did through the slide is you have the unforgettable. So you have Jesse Owens, and I have a link to Jesse Owens. You're going to click the link for Jesse Owens, and I have done all the research. All you have to do is do a little bit of reading and find a few facts about what is he known for. Why is Jesse Owens so important? Why is he unforgettable, right? Jesse Owens is unforgettable because he's one of the greatest athletes in history. In the 1936 Olympics, what did he do? Right here. 1936 Olympics were held in Berlin during World War II. He won 4 gold medals in the game, including gold for the 100-meter sprint, the 200-meter sprint, the 400-meter relay. Oh, wow. Crazy, he died of lung cancer, considering he was a runner. There's a little video here that it shows. That's cute. So, why is he known? He's known as a great Olympian during World War II, and we have to keep in mind, 1936, he lived in Alabama, so he grew up in the segregated South. He grew up under Jim Crow, and he became an Olympic athlete. And in 1933, he was in national high school championships. You have to keep in mind, 1933, schools weren't desegregated. So, the unforgettable, right? We think about athletes who have done so much during the limitations they had. So you're going to pick, each of you are going to be assigned a person, meaning there are 3 persons in the group. Each person has a few slides to do. Each person has 3 individual slides, and then there are 2 slides that every person in the group will do. So each person will do the slavery slide, and each person will do the transatlantic slave trade or the Middle Passage slide, simply because we covered that in depth during our lesson, and I want you all to be able to write something about it. And then you have 3 slides. Excuse me. And then you have 3 slides that you're going to do on your own. The undeniable, slavery in the United States. So each person in the group is going to give 2 points and not to repeat. All right, so what are 2 things to remember about slavery in the United States? Maybe how long it went for. You can refer back to the reading, refer back to your social studies packet to add your points about it. The unflappable, Jack Johnson. This is for person 2. So if we go through your slides, person 2 does Jack Johnson. Same thing, unflappable. And I gave the definition of some of these unwords to really understand what does unflappable, the ability to stay calm and not become upset even in difficult situations. So what happened to Jack Johnson? So he was the Galveston Giant, the first African American world heavyweight boxing champion. 1908. Again, these ads. These individuals mentioned are heroes in themselves and are amazing role models of how they live their lives. If some of the biography information, I mean, really the main key points are right here. But if you go to their later life, Fight of the Century is what he's really known for. He was dubbed the Fight of the Century, and 15 rounds. I mean, that's pretty crazy. He lasted 15 rounds in boxing, and then his fight that he lost, or one of his fights he lost, was a 26th round in Cuba. Like, crazy. And so here's his record, right? He had 73 wins, 40 of them were knockouts, 13 losses, 10 draws, and 5 no contests. So 40 knockouts. I mean, he was just a crazy, amazing, talented, strong athlete. So that's just wrong. So each person has their own. I found the information. So you just need to pick about 2 points for each person, minus the slides where each person is going to be including 2 points about their life. Those who shine their light. So this part of the book were all artists, predominantly during the Harlem Renaissance, which was a time when, remember in the video, it talked about redlining, and there were certain areas that were predominantly given to, considered, not the best places to live. And those were given to, after the Civil War, were given to people, black people to live in, or the emancipated slaves, or those who were free, moving to the North, as places to live. But in the 20s, if I'm not mistaken, Jacob Lawrence, my friends who just did art with Miss Ritriardi, you could pick Jacob Lawrence. Although he's more of a 20th century artist, most of these artists, or if I'm not mistaken, were artists during the Harlem Renaissance. So some of them are current, some of them are not. But the person who does slide 5, which is person 1, you just need to pick one artist. I want you to pick one of these people. Okay, Langston Hughes, an amazing poet. Phyllis Wheatley, another great poet. And you get to pick an artist, and then on the next slide, find an image. So, for example, if I wanted to do Phyllis Wheatley, I could go to Phyllis Wheatley. Here's a painting photo. I right-click, and I do copy image, and then I could go to my slide, and I could paste my image, and then I'm going to add my pieces of information about her. And I'm just going to delete this real quick. The people you choose, usually in the first few sentences it tells you who they were. So Phyllis Wheatley, look at the timing of this. This was exactly towards the end of, definitely not during the end of the Civil War. Yeah, the American Revolution was 1765 to 1783. So Phyllis Wheatley wrote during the American Revolution. She survived the Middle Passage. So just even looking at the first few pieces. So it's not necessarily having to write a full paper, but I do want you to include at least a few points about why is that person important, right? How did they shine their light? Person 3 will do the black soldiers during the Civil War, right? The unafraid, those who carried the weary blues to fight for what did he say in his poem? An imperfect union. And so there's facts here about African American soldiers who fought during the American Civil War, right? How many freed African Americans who were living in the United States? How many of them? 14% of them, or they made up 40% of the population, and many of them served as Union soldiers. And briefly, this is what I also talked about in our last one. Many of them, after the Civil War, went on to fight Native Americans as the United States moved west. John Lewis. Person one will do John Lewis. Righteous, right? John Lewis is a civil rights activist. He was a senator. He recently passed away, if I'm not mistaken, last year, last summer. It was really sad, actually. He was an amazing role model. Um, and, what is he known for? He was a representative for Georgia for over 20 years. No, God, I can't count. That's 30 years, 40 years. He was part of the SNCC, which was the Nonviolent Coordinating Committee during the Civil Rights Movement, on to help organize the March on Washington. So just a few points right there, and that's what you need to include. Every person in the group will write 2 points about the transatlantic slave trade and the Middle Passage. What was it? Why is it unspeakable? Right? If you remember in the story, or in the text of the poem, Kwame Alexander mentions unspeakable multiple times, right? The unspeakable, right? Something horrible and bad that happened. And this is where you're going to put your points on it. The unspeakable. So, the 16th Street Baptist Street bombing, this is person two. This is an event that happened during the civil rights era timing. It was in the timeline, but it happened in 1963, and a group of the Southern KKK, which was a white racist supremacist group, that after there's videos showing that after slavery and after the Civil War, these groups came in, especially in the South, to begin to limit the ability of freed slaves and African Americans to feel like they had power of being equal, and to push them back into submission. And so, and they proliferated through a couple hundred years. They were a predominant group of racism in the United States. And so, one group bombed a church, and 4 young girls were there for Sunday school and passed away. Many people were injured. But when we think about the unspeakable, we think about that. And, think about that, an 11-year-old, right? Most of us in class are 11, 14-year-olds, an 8th grader. So young girls, right? Not able to live their life because of racism. We have Martin Luther King, unlimited, without limits, right? In what ways was Martin Luther King an example of being unlimited? That's person three. Wilma Rudolph's and athletes. So, person two. So, there are many athletes put in the poem. What were the words exactly? The unlimited, the Wilma Rudolphs, the Muhammad Ali, the Athea Gibson, the Jesse Owens, the Jordans and the LeBrons, the Serenas, the Sheryls, the Reese Whitleys, and the undiscovered, right? The undiscovered athletes who are pushing through barriers. One here, is it Reese Whitley? Reese Whitley is an up-and-coming swimmer. He was unable to do the went to Cal, 6'9", 19-year-old, and was beating championships and qualified for the 2020 Olympics, but because of COVID, is pushed back now. So he's a contender. Amazing swimming record. So you pretty much have a basketball player, swimmer, pretty much the greatest athlete of all time, in my opinion. Won a Grand Slam while pregnant. I mean, a lot of great male athletes, but I don't think many of them can do that. So that's my opinion there. Sheryl Swoops is basketball player, boxing, Althea Gibson, tennis player, obviously Michael Jordan, Wilma Rudolph. So not only paying attention, if you pick an athlete, what makes them unbelievable. Oh, sorry, the Wilma Rudolphs. So same thing. You can pick an athlete. I'll pick. Let's do Serena. I like Serena. So I pick Serena Williams. I'm going to find my facts, right? She's the #1 women's single tennis player. She's won 23 Grand Slams. I mean, that's crazy. Grand Slams are like the big titles. And pretty much one of the greatest players of all time. Another thing to keep in mind is what they do for community as well. So aside from what makes them great and amazing, is also, for example, like LeBron, right? Everyone knows, like, oh my God, LeBron's the greatest basketball player. But really, what's pretty amazing about LeBron is his he has a. Oh, I thought I mentioned it here. Oh, it's kind of unfortunate. He has a few foundations in his community in Cleveland. Oh, here it's Family Foundation. He has a lot of charities, and so I think it's really important also how they give back to the community. I know he has a couple, almost has like what he said, like LeBron schools for students in his area. So again, you pick a person, you pick their picture, paste their picture, and write a few facts. There's on this slide or on these slides, there's nothing to do here. It's just the links for you to find the information and just pick one person. That's for person 2 is doing an athlete. And then we have the unbelievable, the musicians. So these were majority all jazz musicians during just amazing. People brought jazz music and really changed music in, I think, what was it, early like 30s and 20s. Yeah. So again, you can pick a picture, right click it, and then paste it on the musician side and find your text. Now, all of you will also do the last slide. I want you, at the end, Kwame Alexander says this book is for you and you and you, right? For each person and what you are. So I found an amazing list of words. And I want you to go through this list and pick a word. I gave you a definition. And what word do you identify with? Let's see. Definitely cover now. I'm gonna pick a word. There's a lot. You could just even just take one from the first page. It's perfectly fine. I'm easily excited and I get upset easily, so I'm definitely not unflappable. How about unstoppable, unsurpassed? It's actually just kind of like probably the hardest part. Unambiguous, exhibiting or having a clearly defined meaning, clear and certain. I think I'm going to use the word unambiguous to define me. So I'm going to put my name on my person 1, person 2, person 3. So if I'm person 1, I'm going to put my name, I'm going to put my word, and I'm going to say, why am I unambiguous, right? How do I identify this? And you're not writing a full paragraph, just put a sentence or two. So this document, I have a lot of things opened here. One second. So in your classroom, you are going to have, this is an example of my class, your slide for your person, and you're also going to have an example of a reminder of what slides you're doing. Okay? So everyone does 3 and 9, and obviously the last slide, I didn't mention that. And then you have your other slides. There's maybe a group of 4, and that's been assigned. But you are going to go through and just do your slides. If you have questions, you can ask your teacher. But it's just a fun way to kind of be exposed to different people who've made great contributions to our community, and just to share a beautiful poem and the meaning behind a great poem and story. All right, 5th grade, if you have any questions, you can send me a message on Hangouts. You can send a message to your teacher. Hope you enjoy it. You have a Hangout chat with your small group and be able to talk about what you're working on. All right, have a great day.